Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Egypt's declared 3 days of national mourning after at least 305 people were killed in an attack on a crowded Sufi mosque in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula Friday. Egyptian officials are calling it the deadliest terror attack in Egypt's modern history. On Monday, more than 24 attackers wearing military combat uniforms detonated a bomb inside the mosque, then opened fire with machine guns on fleeing worshippers and set cars ablaze to stop people from being able to escape. Among the victims were at least 27 children. This happened on Friday. Officials are blaming the attack on a militant group linked to ISIS. This is Mohammed Abdel Fattah, the imam of the Rawda Mosque, which was attacked Friday.
Yesterday's sermon was on Muhammad, the prophet of humanity, and the week before that was on Muhammad, the prophet for mercy. I believe these are two issues that the entire world, whether Muslim or non-Muslim, need to implement: mercy, forgiveness, and humanity. A religion based on humanity will never condone violence or aggression such as this.
Over the last year, ISIS-linked militants in Egypt have also repeatedly targeted Coptic Christians, bombing 2 Coptic churches and opening fire on a bus headed to a monastery within hours after Friday's attack. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi appeared on television vowing revenge for the attack. Only minutes later, Egyptian warplanes carried out multiple airstrikes in the desert of the Sinai Peninsula. The military says they were targeting militants fleeing the attack. We'll go to Cairo, Egypt, for more on the attack after headlines. In Washington, D.C., there's chaos at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau as 2 people are battling for control of the Consumer Protection Agency, was created in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. After announcing his resignation earlier in the month, on Friday, former Director Richard Cordray resigned and appointed his former Chief of Staff, Leandra English, to be his successor. But President Trump intervened, unexpectedly announcing he's appointing his budget director, Mick Mulvaney, to head the agency. While serving as a South Carolina congressman, Mulvaney voted to eliminate the agency entirely. Leandra English has sued President Trump over his appointment of Mulvaney. The 2010 Dodd-Frank Act that created the agency specifically calls for the deputy director to become acting director when the agency's top spot is vacant. We'll have more on the battle at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau later in the broadcast. Lawmakers are returning to Capitol Hill today, where they're facing escalating pressure to reveal which lawmakers have used taxpayer money to pay out at least $17 million in settlements for sexual and racial harassment discrimination. While many members of Congress are pushing to pass a resolution to require mandatory sexual harassment awareness training, California Congressmember Jackie Speer is introducing legislation to make all sexual harassment settlements public. The bill would also end a mandatory cooling-off period before accusers can file sexual harassment claims in Congress. Michigan Congressmember John Conyers is stepping aside as the ranking Democratic lawmaker on the House Judiciary Committee after multiple women accused him of sexual harassment and misconduct. Conyers reportedly paid out $27,000 to one woman who alleged she was fired from his Washington staff because she rejected his sexual advances. The news of the settlement was first reported by BuzzFeed after a white supremacist blogger gave BuzzFeed the documents. Conyers denies the accusations. Meanwhile, Minnesota Democratic Senator Al Franken says he will not resign from the Senate, but is returning to Capitol Hill today feeling, as he put it, embarrassed and ashamed after 3 women accused him of groping them without their consent. This all comes as President Trump continues to offer support for Alabama Republican Senate candidate Roy Moore, who's been accused of sexually harassing or assaulting at least 9 women when they were children or teenagers. On Sunday, Trump slammed Moore's opponent, Doug Jones, tweeting, quote, "The last thing we need in Alabama and the U.S. Senate is a Schumer-Pelosi puppet," unquote. Trump himself has been accused of sexual harassment and assault by at least 16 women. The journalism schools at Arizona State University and the University of Kentucky have rescinded awards given to Charlie Rose, who was fired by CBS after nearly a dozen women accused him of sexual harassment and assault. He was also fired as well from PBS and Bloomberg. They severed their contracts with him and his program. The dean of the Arizona's Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication said, quote, "The actions victimized young women, much like those who make up the overwhelming majority of Cronkite students, young women who deserve to enter workplaces that reward them for their hard work, intelligence, and creativity, and where they do not have to fear for their safety or dignity," unquote. Women across the world took to the streets Saturday on the annual International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. Crowds poured into the streets in Peru, Mexico, France, Sweden, Spain, Mozambique, and other countries to protest femicide, rape, and sexual harassment. In Turkey, thousands of women clashed with police in Istanbul during the protest.
They don't even let this march happen. They cannot even tolerate this. They don't want us, the women, to be free. But we will not leave the streets as long as we can.
First, the government needs to stop their discriminating policies, even supported by laws against women, because women will always say no to this.
In South Africa, the Supreme Court of Appeals has more than doubled the prison sentence for Olympic and Paralympic runner Oscar Pistorius, who was convicted of murdering his girlfriend Riva Steenkamp in 2013. The sentence has now been increased from 6 years to 15 years. Back in Washington, D.C., more than 100 senior Foreign Service officers have left the State Department since President Trump took office in what appears to be a forced exodus carried out by Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. Among those to have departed was the State Department's Chief of Security, Bill Miller, who left after Tillerson repeatedly refused to meet with him. Miller is one of the most powerful people at the State Department, yet he was reportedly forced to cite a law requiring him to be allowed to speak with the Secretary of State before Tillerson was willing to meet with him for 5 minutes. We move now to Pope Francis visiting Burma today amidst the Burmese military's ongoing ethnic cleansing campaign against Rohingya Muslims in the majority Buddhist nation. More than 600,000 Rohingyas have fled Burma into neighboring Bangladesh amidst a Burmese military campaign of murder, rape, torture, and forcible displacement. Pope Francis is slated to meet today with the Burmese military leader Min Aung Hlaing, whose sole authority over Burma's armed forces and who's likely planning to run for president in 2020. On Tuesday, Pope Francis will meet with Burma's de facto leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, Nobel Peace Prize winner whose relative silence in the face of the ethnic cleansing campaign has deeply undercut her international standing. This all comes only days after Bangladesh and Burma signed a deal to repatriate hundreds of thousands of Rohingya refugees back to Burma. This is Abdul Manan, a Rohingya refugee speaking from a Bangladeshi refugee camp.
We ought to be returning to our own country, but we have one condition. We Rohingya people want our own nationality to be recognized there. If we are not recognized by the government there, then we will not go back from here.
In Honduras, millions of people went to the polls Sunday to vote in a contested presidential election that pits the authoritarian conservative president, Juan Orlando Hernandez, against the Progressive Alliance's candidate, Salvador Nasralla. As of this morning, Nasralla is heading Hernandez, leading him by about 5 percentage points. Both candidates have claimed victory, although the results have not been fully counted. In Syria, dozens of civilians have been killed in the last 24 hours by shelling and airstrikes reportedly carried out by the Syrian regime and Russia. The attacks occurred in the ISIS-controlled eastern province of Deir ez-Zor and the rebel-controlled district of eastern Ghouta, outside the capital Damascus. Meanwhile, the Pentagon slated to announce in the coming days there are already 2,000 U.S. soldiers inside Syria. The Pentagon's previously claimed there are only 500 U.S. soldiers inside Syria. area. This comes as the U.S. is reportedly ending its strategy of arming Syrian Kurdish fighters, who are the main on-the-ground fighting force in the months-long U.S. campaign that pushed ISIS out of Raqqa. Turkey has opposed the U.S. backing of the Syrian Kurds. In Pakistan, the federal law minister has resigned after weeks of escalating protests in Islamabad. On Saturday, at least 5 people were killed when security forces cracked down on the protesters, firing rubber-coated steel bullets, tear gas, and water cannons. In news on media consolidation, the company Time Inc., which publishes Time Magazine, Sports Illustrated, Fortune, and People, has been bought by Meredith Corporation in a $3 billion deal backed by the Koch brothers. The Meredith Corporation owns the magazines Family Circle, Better Homes and Gardens, and All Recipes. The Koch brothers invested $650 million in the deal. Black workers at Tesla's Fremont, California factory have filed a class-action lawsuit accusing Tesla of being a, quote, hotbed for racist behavior. A former African-American worker at Tesla says he was routinely called the N-word while working at the factory, and that after he complained, he was fired for not having a positive attitude. Tesla is also facing lawsuits accusing the company of discriminating against LGBT workers and older workers. And in Massachusetts, members of Native American tribes from across New England gathered in Plymouth on Thursday to observe the 48th annual National Day of Mourning. As many across the country were celebrating Thanksgiving, the Native Americans were gathering to remember the genocide and colonialism brought by European settlers who established one of the first permanent settlements in North America in Plymouth. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.